Hello everybody, welcome to Talk About Houses. I'm Todd.
I'm Oana.
Okay, so we are going to talk about these rent moratoriums, the extensions by the CDC. There was just one in California. They extended it till like the end of the summer or something. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then Nevada got another extension too. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're not going to talk about the specifics or the legalities, even though a federal judge said the CDC can't actually do any of this. But we're going to talk about unintended consequences for tenants and how this can hurt a tenant. Okay, so what is one of the ways it can hurt a tenant when this craziness starts happening?
Right. So when all of this starts happening, landlords get very nervous because in the olden days, meaning like a year and a half ago, if a tenant didn't pay rent, depending on your local laws, you could evict a tenant for non-payment. Now, with the different moratoriums, it is much more difficult and much more time-consuming, and of course this means much more expensive. What that means to tenants is that landlords are much more cautious. So maybe a landlord would before have rented to somebody with a credit score of 650. Now maybe they won't rent to anybody with a credit score under 680. Maybe before they would have rented with a lower deposit. Now we're seeing landlords who want first month, last month, security, key deposit, cleaning deposit.
Pet deposit.
So let me give you an example. So for example, let's take a house that maybe the rent is $2,300 a month. And now somebody who wants to rent this house is going to have to pay $2,300 for the first month's rent, $2,300 for last month's rent, $2,500 security deposit, $500 cleaning deposit, maybe a $500 pet deposit, maybe a $300 key deposit. So now all of a sudden we're looking at over $8,000 that somebody has to come in with to go rent a house that is $2,300.
It's about $9,000.
Yeah.
The other thing that's going to happen is you used to be able to just fill out your application and you were good. You just filled it out and sent it in. But now they're going to actually want to talk to your previous landlord and your cousin that you claim you rented from. Oh, just call my cousin. I rented from my cousin. They're not going to accept that. They're not going to believe you because what they're afraid is that you were living somewhere not paying rent for a year. You were taking advantage of your landlord because of whatever, and you didn't want to pay him. So they're going to want to actually verify. So they're actually going to want a property management company that actually will say, yes, they were at this address, we managed it, and they made their payments or whatever. But they probably won't accept, just call Fred, and Fred is my cousin, I rented from him, or something like that. They probably won't accept that.
So the other thing that property managers will do now is they will not only talk to maybe your present landlord, but they will talk to your previous landlord as well. Because there is this sentiment that perhaps your present landlord is going to give you a glowing review in an effort to get you out of their property and into somebody else's property, so you're someone else's problem. So maybe they will go back to your previous landlord or even the one before that to go ahead and have that conversation and know more about you. So they're looking for a higher deposit, they're looking for a higher credit score, they're maybe less forgiving of credit issues, of maybe collections, certainly no evictions. So there's a lot more. Maybe they're looking for even higher income than they would have accepted before. So all these things that they need, they feel that they need more of a sense that you're more likely to pay than maybe they would have had in the past, because in the past they felt, well, if this tenant ends up not paying, then we can get this tenant out and get somebody else in. It's no longer that easy, so landlords, property managers are much more careful now.
I think long term that these are bad for tenants. Anytime government interferes with the market and interferes with the contract between a landlord and a tenant, rents go up. Yes. Look at places where rents are extremely high. In New York City, San Francisco, you have cities that imposed restrictions, and the restrictions ultimately get passed on to the tenant, because the landlord can do that because he owns the asset and it is a scarce resource. The tenant is kind of screwed because the tenant either has to buy or has to rent. And the people that are tenants, for the most part, either can't buy because they can't afford to buy, or they don't have the time frame. Like they're only going to be there for a year, then they're being transferred, or it's a temporary job. They're just trying out, the city. So I think long term this is bad. If you look at markets where there's very little, and Las Vegas has been up until last year. Las Vegas has been a market where there's been very little influence between state and local governments and landlord-tenant relationships, and rents have been very, very low. You can rent it. I think median rents were $1,200 or $1,300 a year or two ago before they started going up. So, and remember, that includes condos and townhomes. And, but with this, landlords are going to bump up the rents, and because they have to economically compensate themselves for the risk that some other thing's going to, Delta variant or some other variant of COVID's going to come back, and they're going to come out and have to, another one of these, can't evict people because of COVID, and then they're afraid that they'll just, we'll take advantage of it. Now we're going to stay here for 9 months for free. And there'll be no recourse because we'll just stay for free, and then we'll move into somebody else's house and claim, we just wanted a bigger place or wanted to live in a different part of town, and they'll go through that again. And I think ultimately 100% of this gets passed on to tenants. I don't think landlords short term might take it in the shorts, but for the long run, the tenants end up paying it back with interest, back to the landlord.
Right, because the whole dynamic changes, and it changes long term. These are habits that will continue past this historic landmark that we've all kind of gone through over the last year and a half. So these trends, I think, will continue unless there's some other reason why they wouldn't. But right now, there's no reason why a year from now, when this is all behind us, landlords would not continue down this path, because it works and it's safeguarding their investment, and they have enough takers. So long as there are enough takers, then this pattern will continue.
The other thing to keep in mind is that these are not laws. These are edicts that government agencies, governors, that have basically said, we're just going to do this, right? We're going to tell the court not to evict. We're going to tell, or some health agency says you can't do this, right? And whether it's legal or not, as long as the people that that do the eviction say, okay, well, we're going to abide by that, right? Then you can't really, it's hard to fight. You have to go to court, and like landlords tend to not want to do that. It's easier just to find a way to get the people out of the house, or to find a way to collect rent. And normally it's a legislature that comes in and creates, whether it's a state legislature or city government, comes in and creates these artificial, you can only raise rent 5%, you can only you have to give 45 or 60 days notice when you're going to terminate somebody's lease. Or, if they miss a payment now, you can't charge late fees for 15 days before you could maybe charge them right off the bat. Those are legislated, that's law. Everyone has to follow that. But the interfering with the contract between a buyer and a seller under existing law, basically negating it. Hey, you don't have to. That'd be like saying, well, they don't have to make their car payment. They have to make their student loan payment. We're just going to forgive it because of whatever reason. Or there's the person on the other side who's not getting money, you made this agreement to do it. And like with all things, it's the golden rule, which is he who has the gold makes the rules.
Right.
So the people with the properties are going to push back.
Right.
And, to some extent, the tenants are going to say, yeah, I remember living there for 9 months for free. But ultimately what's going to happen is, if they're a long-term tenant, which a lot of people are, they're lifetime tenants, they're going to end up paying for this throughout their life. People are going to remember this. Landlords have a long memory, and they punish future tenants for things past tenants did.
Well, and the most unfortunate thing in the whole thing, I think, is that everyone is being punished for what the few have done. And that's really, I think, that the tragedy of the whole thing. One of the other things that we didn't talk about is people's credit reports. So right now in people's credit reports, if you have a student loan, there's been the moratorium on the student loan payments. So the credit reports are not necessarily reflecting what those obligations are. So let's say that you have 6 student loans, which is not uncommon for young people to have multiple student loans. So when I look at your credit report, I can see your balance, but I can't see your payments because there's a moratorium on the payments and they're actually not showing up on your credit report. So now I don't know, as a landlord or as a property manager, when those student loans spool back up and they want you to make payments, how much will those payments be?
Sure.
I don't know if each of those is $150 a month, each of those is $200 a month. I have no idea. So now that makes me more cautious as well. So now I may want a higher deposit, or I may simply say, you know what, I don't know what those numbers are, so maybe I need to consider a different tenant altogether. So it's very difficult for landlords to look at this information because now it's incomplete. And before we could see that if you owed $1,000 on your credit card, your minimum payment was $50. Great, I can see that. I could see that if you owe $3,500 on your student loan, your monthly payment is $120. Great, I can see that. But now I can see that you owe your student loan $3,500, but I can't see what your payment is because of the payment moratorium on student loans.
Yeah. The other thing too to keep in mind is some of these, like I think California said, well, don't worry, landlords, your tenant doesn't have to pay, but we're going to make the payment. We're going to make the payment for him. So tenants are like, oh yeah, the state's going to pay. I'm just going to live here and let the state pay. Landlord will get his money. He'll be fine. Well, that's actually not the case. The landlord is not going to be fine, and this is why. The landlord is used to collecting rents, say on the 1st, putting the money in the bank, and then, his payment to the bank on his loan is, say, the 10th. So he makes his payment to the bank. These government programs don't work that slick. It's a ton of paperwork. It's a ton of time. And they usually have to go through a process. And sometimes they don't get their money for like 90 days. Like we did. If you go to try this, do unclaimed funds in any state. Mm-hmm. It's your money, right? It's you own that money. Go to the government and say, hey, unclaimed funds, and send in your thing and see how many months it takes you to get back your $150 of unclaimed funds, right? So imagine this now, you go 3 months without a payment, and then you're finally getting the payments, but you've been making payments out of your reserve account or your reserve funds or whatever to hopefully you have it that much to make the payment. But the bottom line is this: the landlord's going to remember that the tenant didn't pay. He's going to be resentful that he had to go through this hassle. When lease renewal time comes, it used to be easy for everybody to just stay in the house. You're going to see a lot more churn. Mm-hmm. The churn is going to do 2 things. It's an excess cost and hassle for the tenant because the tenant has to move, and then they're going to raise the rent. Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest thing that what I've seen is if you look at a property that's listed for rent and then look a year later and see what it rented for with a new tenant, it goes back on the market, that's how you can tell it has a new tenant. It's usually a lot more. Mm-hmm. And tenants, a lot of times, if you say, hey, I'm raising your rent 15% or whatever, or you may not be able to raise the rent 15% because there's a law in place that you can't do it. So the landlord says, you know what? The law says I can only raise your rate 5 or 8%, but I really need to raise it 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not renew your deal. We're just going to throw you out. I'm going to get a new tenant at a higher rate because a new tenant's not subject to whatever. I can put whatever rent I want out there. And then, oh, by the way, your rent is going to go up by 10 or 15%. Because the next house you go to is going to charge that. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. It's in theory, this is part of the excess burden of a tax. It's the excess burden when government starts interfering. It's a double burden because A, you still pay the amount. B, you now have to move too. That's the way the market adjusts to these crazy government interventions.
And there's a cost associated with moving. Okay, so moving isn't free. We've all moved. We know moving isn't free. Even if you're doing the move yourself, it takes time off work to move. It takes time to find a place to relocate to. It takes time to load up the U-Haul truck and get all your friends to help you.
Move all your utilities to the new place.
Right, move all that. And then on top of that, now you have to come up with all, remember, when we started, you have to come up with that maybe $8,000, $9,000 to move into the new place, which you may not have. Even if you're going to be getting all of your deposits back from your current landlord has 30 days after you've moved out to give you your deposits back, but the new landlord wants all the money up front. So that's an additional burden on you too. So like I said, the really tragic thing in the whole thing is that while perhaps government meant to help, their help, I think, is hurting everyone while it was designed to help just a few people.
So in summary, the rent moratoriums, as well as all the other crazy things that government tends to do to try to protect renters, end up actually not protecting renters, in my opinion. And I think we talked about this a couple years ago when we first started seeing the new government in certain states start changing the laws to protect tenants. And then landlords said, okay, we have an answer for that. So the landlords are going to win. The market ultimately is going to prevail. Landlords are going to figure out a way, and it's usually going to be even worse for tenants, not trying to punish the tenant, they're just trying to protect themselves. And inadvertently, these things really don't tend to help tenants.
No. Look, the market will figure its way out to something that makes sense. And we appreciate the fact that government is trying to help the few, but in that it's hurting the many.
Yeah. If you got all the way to the end of the video, thanks a lot. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you have any comments or any videos you'd like to see, you can put them down below in the comments. And what else?
Leave us notes, because we love your notes and we love your suggestions for videos.
All right. Bye.